The desperate call. The crystal spires of Zephyros Prime had stood for 12,000 years, their surfaces catching and refracting the gentle light of twin suns into rainbow patterns that danced across the floating gardens. Elder Lysa moved through the Grand Council chambers with grace that seemed to defy gravity itself, her translucent wings barely stirring the perfumed air. The Zephyrians had built their civilization on principles of harmony, art, and the preservation of beauty throughout the galaxy. Today, those principles meant nothing. Lysa's forearms trembled as she activated the emergency broadcast system, something that had never been used in recorded history. Around her, the other council members floated in their meditation spheres, their bioluminescent patterns flickering with fear and confusion. Through the transparent walls of the chamber, she could see the evacuation ships rising from the cities below, carrying millions of her people toward the outer colonies in desperate hope of survival. The enemy had a name, though speaking it felt like poison on her delicate vocal cords. The Crimson Horde. They were not born but manufactured, a fusion of organic tissue and cold metal that served only one purpose: the consumption and conversion of all living matter into more of themselves. They had appeared at the edge of Zephyrian space 3 cycles ago, their massive ships bristling with weapons that turned entire worlds into lifeless husks. "Elder, the transmission array is ready," announced Keth, the youngest member of the council. His wing patterns showed deep purple with anxiety, a color Lysa had rarely seen among her peaceful people. The Zephyrians had no military beyond ceremonial guards. Their conflicts had always been resolved through meditation and artistic expression. They possessed no weapons capable of harming the mechanical monstrosities that now read their worlds. Lysa approached the communication console, its bioorganic surface responding to her touch with warm pulses of light. She had crafted this message carefully, knowing it might be the last words ever spoken by her species. The transmission would be broadcast on all known frequencies, reaching every corner of the galaxy where intelligent life might exist. "This is Elder Lysa of the Zephyrian Collective," she began, her musical voice carrying across light years of space. "We are a peaceful alliance of 12 worlds, devoted to art, philosophy, and the nurturing of life in all its forms. For 12 millennia, we have harmed no living being, and sought only to create beauty and understanding among the stars." She paused, watching through the chamber's dome as another evacuation ship struggled to break orbit, its hull scarred by enemy fire. The Crimson Horde's advanced scouts were already in the outer system, their red energy signatures growing stronger by the hour. "We now face extinction. The entities known as the Crimson Horde consume worlds not for resources, but for the joy of destruction itself. They convert all organic matter into their mechanical servants, using our life essence to power their war machines. We have lost 7 worlds, and our remaining colonies cannot withstand their advance." The transmission equipment hummed with power as it prepared to send her words across the galaxy. Lysa spread her wings wide, a gesture of supplication among her people. "We call upon any beings who might hear this message. Our archives speak of warrior races, protectors who defend the innocent against the darkness between stars. If such beings exist, if you have the strength to stand against this evil, we offer everything we possess. Our knowledge, our art, our very souls if necessary. We ask only that some memory of our people survive this catastrophe." As the message launched into the void, Lysa wondered if anyone would even understand their language. The universal translators worked for basic communication, but conveying the full weight of their desperation seemed impossible. She closed her primary eyes and felt the gentle touch of the Council's collective consciousness, offering what comfort they could in these final hours. 3,000 light-years away, in the mining system of New Brisbane, Captain Marcus Reed was finishing his 3rd cup of synthetic coffee when the alien transmission arrived. The orbital processing station hummed with activity as automated systems extracted rare minerals from the asteroid belt, but the communications array had been quiet all shift. That changed when the deep space monitoring equipment detected the broad-spectrum alien broadcast. Reed was a product of humanity's expansion into the outer rim, born on a world where the gravity was twice Earth standard and the atmosphere carried trace toxins that would kill most known species within minutes. He stood 2 meters tall, his scarred hands bearing testament to decades of combat engineering in humanity's colonial wars. His crew respected him not for his diplomatic skills, which were minimal, but for his ability to get them home alive from situations that would have destroyed lesser commanders. "Sir, you need to hear this," called out Communications Officer Sarah Chen from her station. The young woman had served with Reed for 5 years, long enough to know when something truly unusual was happening. She activated the translation protocols and played the alien message through the bridge speakers. The voice that emerged was unlike anything in human databases. It carried a musical quality that reminded Reed of wind through crystal formations, but underneath the beauty lay pure terror. The translation software worked for several minutes before producing readable text, and what it revealed made Reed's blood run cold. "How far out are they?" Reed asked, studying the stellar coordinates included in the transmission. "Best estimate puts the Zephyrian system at 14 days travel using maximum fold space jumps," replied navigator Tom Walsh. The grizzled spacer had served with Reed since their days in the colonial Marines, and his weathered face showed the same concern that Reed felt. "But Captain, look at this data about the Crimson Horde. The energy signatures match some of the anomalies we've been tracking in the outer spiral." Reed pulled up the long-range sensor data on his command display. For months, his crew had been detecting strange readings from systems that had gone suddenly silent. Ships that vanished without distress calls, mining colonies that stopped responding to communications, entire trade routes that became dead zones overnight. They had assumed it was pirates or separatist activity. This was something far worse. "Chen, get me a channel to Colonial Command," Reed ordered. "Priority Alpha encryption. And Walsh, start calculating jump solutions to that system. I want options." The reply from Colonial Command came back within hours, and it was exactly what Reed had expected. The bureaucrats on Earth were not interested in alien refugees. Humanity was still expanding its own territory, still fighting wars with rebel colonies and dealing with internal conflicts. The idea of risking ships and personnel for unknown aliens was politically impossible. But Reed had not survived 30 years on the frontier by following politicians' orders when lives were at stake. "Sir, we're not exactly what these Zephyrians are looking for," pointed out Lieutenant Davies, Reed's second-in-command. The young officer had read the full translation and understood the implications. "They're calling for noble protector, Earth's legendary peacekeepers. We're mining engineers and freight haulers with military backgrounds." Reed stood at the observation deck, looking out at the asteroid field where his automated harvesters continued their endless work. The Zephyrians had called for heroes from their mythology, beings of light who would sweep down from the stars to save the innocent. Instead, they would get humanity, a species that most of the galaxy considered barely civilized barbarians who had clawed their way off a death world through violence and stubborn determination. "Davies, pull up our personnel files," Reed said quietly. "How many combat veterans do we have on this station?" The lieutenant's fingers danced across her control pad. 47 former military, 12 with special operations experience, plus about 30 civilians with mining explosive certifications and heavy equipment operation. Reed nodded. It was not much, but it was what they had. The mining station's maintenance bays held heavy equipment that could be weaponized, and the cargo haulers could be converted for military transport with some creative engineering. More importantly, word was already spreading through the frontier communications network. Other mining stations, freight captains, and colonial militias were picking up the Zephyrian transmission and asking the same questions Reed was asking. "Open a channel to all vessels in this sector," Reed commanded. "Let's see who else heard that message and wants to do something about it." Within 6 hours, Reed's impromptu fleet had grown to 12 ships. They were not warships in any traditional sense. Converted freighters, mining vessels, and colonial patrol boats that had been cobbled together from spare parts and determination. Their crews were miners, traders, and frontier settlers who had signed up for adventure and found themselves volunteering for what might be a suicide mission. The largest vessel was the cargo hauler Prometheus, which Reed claimed as his flagship. Its captain, Elena Rodriguez, had served as a dropship pilot during the Centauri Rebellion and knew how to modify civilian craft for combat operations. Together they worked through the night converting mining laser arrays into ship-to-ship weapons and fabricating armor plating from processed asteroid materials. "You realize this is insane," Rodriguez told Reed, as they watched her crew install missile racks where cargo containers used to be stored. "We don't know anything about these Zephyrians, except that they're about to be extinct. We don't know anything about this Crimson Horde, except that they're apparently unstoppable, and we definitely don't know if our weapons will even work against alien technology." Reed clapped the smaller woman on the shoulder, feeling the solid muscle beneath her jumpsuit. Rodriguez had grown up on Kepler 442b, a world where the native predators could bite through steel and the weather patterns included acid storms. Like most humans from the colony worlds, she was tougher than she looked. "Elena, 12,000 years ago, some species thought humans were unstoppable too. We proved them wrong. Maybe it's time someone returned the favor." The makeshift fleet prepared for departure as word continued to spread through human space. Reed recorded a simple message and broadcast it to every human colony within communication range. It was not eloquent or inspiring like the speeches that politicians gave during wartime. It was the kind of plain speaking that frontier humans understood. "This is Captain Reed of the new Brisbane Mining Collective. We've received a distress call from an alien species facing extinction. Their attackers are something called the Crimson Horde, and from what we can tell, they're the kind of enemy that won't stop with one species. We're heading out to help. Any ship that wants to join us, rendezvous at these coordinates. Fair warning, we're probably flying into a fight we can't win, but that's never stopped humans before." As the ships powered up their fold space drives, Reed took one last look at the asteroid mining operation that had been his home for the past 5 years. The automated systems would continue their work, sending processed materials back to the inner colonies. With luck, he and his crews would return to find everything exactly as they had left it. With more realistic expectations, this might be the last time any human saw New Brisbane again. The Zephyrians had called for legendary protectors, noble beings who would arrive with fanfare and ceremony to save their ancient civilization. Instead, they were about to meet a collection of miners, traders, and colonial veterans who had decided that someone needed to help, even if they were the wrong species for the job. Reed settled into the captain's chair of the Prometheus and felt the familiar vibration of the fold space engines coming online. Around him, his crew prepared for the unknown, with the casual competence that came from years of working in environments that could kill them without warning. "All ships report ready for jump," announced Chen from the communication station. "Then let's go see what happens when humans show up uninvited to an alien war," Reed replied, and gave the order to jump. Deathworlders answer the call. The fold space jump ended with the familiar sensation of reality reasserting itself around the small human fleet. Reed felt his stomach settle as the Prometheus dropped back into normal space at the edge of the Zephyrian system. What he saw through the viewscreen made him understand why the aliens had sounded so desperate in their transmission. The system was a war zone. Elegant alien vessels, their hulls flowing like frozen music, drifted between the planets in various states of destruction. Some were clearly evacuation ships, packed beyond capacity and struggling to reach the outer system's jump pods. Others were the remains of what might have been a defensive fleet, though their graceful designs suggested they had been built more for beauty than battle. And advancing through it all were the ships of the Crimson Horde. Reed had seen war machines before, from the angular destroyers of the Centauri rebels to the biomechanical monstrosities that pirates sometimes cobbled together from stolen technology. The Horde ships were different. They looked like someone had taken living tissue and forced it to grow around mechanical frameworks, creating vessels that pulsed with unnatural life. Red energy patterns ran along their hulls like corrupted blood vessels, and their weapon arrays moved with organic fluidity. "Jesus Christ," whispered Rodriguez from her position at the tactical station. "How many of them are there?" Navigator Walsh ran the numbers through the ship's computers. "Sensors show at least 40 heavy combat vessels, plus escort craft. They're advancing on the inner planets in a standard harvesting pattern." Reed studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had survived 3 colonial wars, by understanding how his enemies thought. The Horde was not trying to conquer the Zephyrian worlds quickly. They were taking their time, systematically destroying the defensive capabilities while herding the civilian population toward capture points. This was not a war of territory or resources. This was a hunt. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from one of the alien ships," reported Chen. "They've detected us and are requesting identification." "Put them through full translation protocol." The voice that came through the speakers was similar to the one from the distress call, but carried a different emotional resonance. Where Elder Lysa had sounded desperate, this alien seemed confused and frightened. "Unknown vessels, this is Science Coordinator Vel of T. He researched ship Harmony's Dream. Please identify yourselves immediately and withdraw from this system. The Crimson Horde shows no mercy to any organic life forms." Reed activated the communication system, speaking slowly to give the translators time to work. "Science Coordinator Vel, this is Captain Reed of the human vessel Prometheus. We received your people's distress call and came to help." The silence that followed lasted long enough for Reed to wonder if the translation had failed. When Vel spoke again, his voice carried a note of something between hope and terror. "Human, you are from the Forbidden Worlds? The Death Worlders spoke of in the Galactic Council warnings?" Reed looked around his bridge at the confused faces of his crew. They had expected to be unknown to these aliens, not actively feared by them. "I don't know about any Galactic Council coordinator. We're from the colony worlds in the Outer Rim. We came because someone needed help." Another long pause, then Vel's voice returned with what sounded like resignation mixed with desperate hope. "Captain Reed, permission to come aboard your vessel. If you are truly here to help, we must speak directly. But be warned, the Council records describe humans as the most dangerous species in known space." An hour later, Reed found himself face to face with his first alien. Science Coordinator Vel had arrived via shuttle, and the being that emerged from the docking bay was unlike anything in human imagination. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, but seemed to weigh almost nothing, his translucent skin showing a complex network of silver and blue patterns beneath. When he moved, it was with a floating grace that made Reed think of deep ocean creatures he had seen on Earth's nature documentaries. "You are much smaller than the records indicated," Vel said, studying Reed with large eyes that seemed to see in spectrums beyond human vision. "And your vessel carries the scent of violence and metal." Reed tried to put the alien at ease, though he quickly realized that everything about human technology seemed to disturb Vel. The walls were too hard, the lights too harsh, the air too thick with the smell of recycled atmosphere and industrial lubricants. "Coordinator, can you tell us about the Crimson Horde? We want to help, but we need to understand what we're facing." Vel settled onto a specially prepared seat, his form seeming to partially phase through the solid matter. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound loss. "The Horde is not life as we understand it. They are silicon-based entities merged with organic components, existing partially outside normal space-time. They consume organic matter not for nutrition, but to fuel their reproduction and to power their biomechanical systems. They take living beings and integrate them into their ships, using our life energy to operate their weapons and propulsion systems." He activated a small device that projected holographic images into the air between them. Reed saw Zephyrian cities being consumed by writhing mechanical tendrils, their graceful inhabitants being dragged into organic processing chambers aboard the Horde ships. "Our military consists of ceremonial guards with energy batons designed for crowd control during festivals. We have no weapons of war because we have never needed them. In 12,000 years of civilization, we have never faced an enemy that could not be reasoned with or turned aside through diplomacy." Reed studied the tactical information Vel provided, cross-referencing it with his own observations of the Horde fleet. The enemy ships were heavily armored and carried weapons that could strip the atmosphere from a planet, but their movement patterns suggested they relied on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical flexibility. Coordinator, we need to evacuate your people from the inner system. My ships can provide escort for your evacuation fleet, but we'll need to punch through the Horde blockade. Vel's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deep purple, which Reed had learned indicated extreme anxiety among his species. Captain, you have 12 vessels. The Horde has 50. Even if the Council records about human combat capabilities are accurate, the mathematics are impossible. Reed stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at his small fleet of converted civilian ships. Rodriguez was right that this was insane. By any reasonable tactical assessment, they were about to commit suicide, but Reed had not spent 30 years on the frontier by being reasonable. Coordinator, let me tell you something about humans. We don't usually win fights because we're stronger or faster or smarter than our enemies. We win because we're too stubborn to quit and too crazy to know when we're beaten. The battle began 6 hours later as the human fleet moved toward the inner system where the main Zephyrian evacuation ships were trapped. Reed had divided his force into 3 groups: heavy hitters led by Rodriguez and the converted cargo haulers, fast attack craft that could dart in and out of enemy formations, and support vessels that would coordinate evacuation efforts. The Crimson Horde reacted to the human approach with what seemed like amusement. Their larger ships maintained their positions around the Zephyrian worlds, while lighter vessels moved to intercept. Reed counted 15 enemy ships converging on his position, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in his fleet. All ships, this is Reed. Remember, we're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We just need to open a corridor for the evacuees. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't try to be heroes. The first exchange of fire lit up space between the 2 fleets. Reed watched as mining laser arrays that had been designed to cut through asteroids punched through the organic armor of Horde ships, spilling atmosphere and strange fluids into the vacuum. The enemy returned fire with weapons that seemed to bend space at itself, creating gravitational anomalies that crushed one of the human escort vessels like a tin can. But something unexpected happened. The Horde ships, for all their technological superiority, began to show tactical confusion when the humans refused to engage in the kind of orderly battle they expected. Mining vessels used industrial tractor beams to grab enemy ships and slam them into each other. Converted freighters loaded with mining explosives rammed Horde vessels at full acceleration, detonating their cargo bays in proximity blasts that crippled multiple targets. "Sir, the alien fleet is moving," reported Chen from her station. "The Zephyrian evacuation ships are breaking orbit." Reed looked at the tactical display and felt something like pride. The Horde had been so focused on the approaching human fleet that they had ignored the fleeing civilians. By the time they realized what was happening, most of the Zephyrian population was already accelerating toward the jump points. But the victory was coming at a cost. Reed had lost 4 ships, and the survivors were running low on ammunition and power. The Horde was regrouping, bringing their heavy vessels to bear on the remaining human craft. That was when Science Coordinator Vel's voice came over the communication system, but he was no longer speaking from the safety of the human flagship. "Captain Reed, this is Vel aboard the research vessel Harmony's Dream. My people and I have studied your tactical methods. We understand now what makes humans different." Reed looked at his sensors and saw that several Zephyrian ships had broken from the evacuation fleet and were returning to the battle. Their graceful hulls were not designed for combat, but they carried scientific equipment that could be weaponized in creative ways. "Coordinator, get your people out of here. This isn't your fight." "Captain, with respect, you are wrong. This became our fight the moment you arrived. The Council records describe humans as dangerous because you do not know when to surrender. But they miss the most important point about your species. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with repurposed scientific instruments, gravity manipulators that had been designed to study stellar phenomena now focused on Horde vessels. The effects were devastating, as enemy ships found themselves crushed by artificial gravitational fields or torn apart by spatial distortions. "You do not fight alone," Vel continued. "Wherever humans go, they make allies. They inspire others to become more than they thought possible." The combined human-Zephyrian fleet pressed their attack with renewed vigor. The graceful aliens learned quickly from their human allies, using their superior technology in ways their peaceful culture had never imagined. Mining equipment designed for asteroid processing was retargeted against enemy armor. Scientific sensors were reprogrammed to blind horde targeting systems. Even evacuation ships turned their cargo handling systems into improvised weapons. The tide of battle shifted as more Zephyrian vessels joined the fight. For the first time in their 12,000-year history, the gentle aliens were learning to wage war. But they were not becoming monsters. They were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a peaceful species that chose to fight not for conquest or survival, but to protect others who needed protection. The Horde began to withdraw. Their ships, designed to overwhelm peaceful civilizations through superior firepower, found themselves facing an enemy that adapted faster than their tactical systems could compensate. The survivors of the alien fleet retreated toward the edge of the system, sending strange signals into deep space that Reed's communications officer could not translate. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into fold space, Reed found himself surrounded by alien ships broadcasting messages of gratitude in dozens of languages. The Zephyrian evacuation fleet had stopped at the edge of the system to watch the battle, and now their survivors were returning to reclaim their worlds. Science Coordinator Vel docked with the Prometheus again, but this time he was accompanied by Elder Lysa herself. The ancient Zephyrian leader floated in the cargo bay like a living work of art, her translucent wings catching and refracting the harsh human lighting into patterns of incredible beauty. "Captain Reed," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to sing. "The legends spoke of noble protectors who would arrive to save the innocent. We expected beings of light and wisdom. Instead, we found something better." Reed stood before the alien leaders, feeling awkward in his dirty jumpsuit and scarred hands. Around him, his crew performed maintenance on equipment that had been pushed far beyond its design limits. The cargo bay smelled of machine oil, recycled air, and human sweat. It was not the setting for a diplomatic meeting between species. "Elder, we're just miners and freight haulers. We're not heroes from your legends." Elder Lysa approached Reed, moving with that impossible grace that made her seem to float through the air. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of authority built over millennia of leadership. "Captain, you are wrong. Heroes are not born from legend. They are created when ordinary beings choose to do extraordinary things because someone needs help. Today, we learned that humans do not wait for permission to do what is right. You saw strangers in trouble and came to help, even though we were unknown to you and you had nothing to gain." She gestured toward the view screen where Zephyrian ships were already beginning restoration work on their damaged worlds.